Hello, I'm Lucy Johnston. I'm Health and Social Affairs Editor of the Sunday Express and host of Sketch Notes on a Pandemic podcast. Delighted to be joined today by Molly Kingsley, co-founder of the children's rights group UsForThem. She's going to talk to us today about why she formed the group and what its goals are and where we are now with it. So welcome, Molly. Thanks so much for joining us. So let's start by asking you why you formed the group UsForThem and what it's become, and who are you really?
Yeah, of course. I mean, thank you so much for having me on, Lucy. We formed, about a year and a half ago now, right at the start of the pandemic, or maybe about a month into it, and it was the time of the original school closures, I, at the time, had a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old, I think they would have been. And actually, the prompt for starting the group wasn't actually so much for me, school closures. It was pictures of nursery children. Do you remember there was an awful photo at the time flying around the internet of very young nursery children in a French playground, actually, and they were sitting in these 2 by 2 meter squares, isolated from their friends. And obviously, because my youngest was about that age, it just really struck me as being a very wrong societal response to something that didn't actually impact children. You have these children who are too young really to understand what was going on, being separated off from their friends. And I just had this visceral, is the word I always use to describe this visceral reaction to it, and thought, this is awful. And I just wrote this very heartfelt blog post, stuck it on Twitter. I had like 30 Twitter followers at the time, and actually it got retweeted by Alison Pearson, the Telegraph journalist. And through that, within minutes, it turned out that actually there were quite a few parents that shared this same sense of something not being quite right. And I met on that day my two co-founders, Liz Cole and Christine Brett, and we had a conversation on Twitter and took it offline. And within, about 24 hours had launched our first campaign, which was actually about social distancing rather than school closures.
So you're not an activist or weren't an activist, and what's your background?
So my background originally was a lawyer. I was a lawyer for close to 10 years in the city, just corporate law, nothing really to do with this. And then after that, I had a tech business. And I've sometimes kind of thought, my career made no sense until this moment. And now it makes perfect sense, because I think both those skills have come in, really helpful.
So you're not, are you paid? I mean, is it something that is it the money generating group?
I wish we were paid. Sadly, we're not paid. No, we are all volunteers. We do raise money. We raise money, small sums of money in the scheme of things, for legal support, for, a limited amount of PR, also things like internet hosting. But no, we don't pay ourselves. And actually, and for some of us, it's been, the other way around, sadly.
Right. So at the time when you saw that picture, did you not think, well, maybe this is a necessary measure? Did we know enough about the virus to know whether that was appropriate or not? And did you not sort of think, well, children will be prioritized? What happened to your thinking at that time and going on?
I think we were really quite shocked, actually, because I think even at that time, we knew, thankfully, that children were not at huge risk, or at least most children were not at huge risk from the virus. And I think even at that time, we knew that, this was a virus that was quite discriminatory in who it impacted worse. And of course, these measures are very indiscriminate. And I think that was one issue we had from the start. And I think, I guess maybe we were quite naive in the early days, thinking, of course, they must have thought about the kids and, it will all be okay. And actually, if you remember, school closures at first were a temporary 3-week measure. 18 months later and 1 billion school days lost, it doesn't look that temporary. And actually, I think as a society, we forgot about the kids.
Your group now, from that standing start, has now become probably one of the most successful kind of children's rights group linked with the pandemic. I mean, how much support have you had? Have you felt that you've had significant support from sort of the right places?
I mean, I think we've had, I guess it's been a bit like Marmite. We've had the most humbling and tremendous amount of support from some quarters, and we've had the most vicious abuse from others. And I think, in terms of support, it really has been quite overwhelming. So from the very first minutes we launched the campaign, we had an influx of hundreds, if not thousands, of supporters, just normal parents, reach out and say, "Thank God you're saying this. We feel the same. How can we help?" And that's been a consistent feature. Actually, we are inundated quite often with requests by people who, just like us, will do anything to try and get this stopped. I think in the early days, actually, we had support from, I guess, people you might call influencers. So people like Carol Sikora, Claire Fox, who were, we found them, or they found us probably through Twitter, actually. And they, you stand on people's shoulders for something like this, don't you? And they were integral, I think, in the early days. And then I guess after that, people such as yourself, Lucy, there have been people within the press who have held us up, I guess. And, we are just so grateful for that.
We're grateful to you for what you're doing. I wonder why, do you think there's a reason why other children or groups that normally represent children haven't been so vociferous, or do you think they haven't?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have been very surprised, particularly in the early days. Actually, we wrote to every single children's charity and said, "Will you help us? Will you speak for the children? What is going on here? Like, something is wrong." And not a single one replied to us. And I think it has been a continuous feature of this pandemic that people who should have spoken up for children, and actually in many cases are paid to speak up for children, have not done so.
Why do you think that is?
I mean, I think the fact that it has become so polarized so early on really isn't helpful. And, I talked a bit about the abuse, and that has been, unfortunately, a defining feature. And it's very off-putting, I think. I think there's a lot of people who are in paid roles, sometimes those roles paid by the state, who perhaps feel too conflicted to speak, perhaps feel that they would, be at risk of losing their jobs were they to speak up. And but I think actually the division within the press and this very hostile reaction to people who are actually just trying to defend children or to present a different narrative is really, really unhelpful.
Well, quite dark as well. It's quite I've never come across it before. You talked about abuse. Can you sort of distinguish that? What's been happening, and have you any idea why?
I mean, I think, from the very beginning, it is clear that there are lots of people that didn't agree with us.
And specifically, did they not agree with?
I think there's a view that, it's become a very controversial position to argue for children. And I think actually one of the things that I've noticed throughout is that we would consider ourselves pro-child rather than anti anything. And I think maybe the people who have been, arguing from the other side have, and it's awful that you talk in sides, but it's this smear of you're anti-mask or anti-vax or whatever it is. It's like, well, no, we're not really. We're pro-child. We look at it from a child point of view. What's best for children? And I think it's very unhelpful to attach these very negative labels to things. It puts people off standing up, and it makes it very hostile when actually it shouldn't need to be so hostile.
How do you distinguish the other side? Are you talking about people that want more measures and more COVID suppression measures around children? So, for example, masks, it could be argued they're sort of zero cost, so easy intervention. And if it helps a bit, then what's the harm? Is that what you're talking about? The other side who want more measures imposed on children to stop the spread of COVID. Is that what you're sort of?
I mean, I think it's, if anything, it's wider than that, I think, isn't it? Because you've had, there's this general lockdown, anti-lockdown kind of dichotomy that seems to have split us somewhat. And I think that's very sad. I think it's well beyond time that actually we look forward and we look to, I think everyone now agrees when bringing it back to children, that children have been very damaged by what's happened. And actually, in a way, let's just move beyond, this sort of mudslinging, and let's talk about, well, how do we come out of this and how do we build back in a way that actually really benefits these children? And I think that's very hard to do when you have a climate where people still feel unable to talk about what's happened.
Yeah. So the abuse how has it sort of manifested specifically? Yes, you say anti-mask, anti-vax. You did have a sort of campaign to make people aware about the potential harms of vaccinating 12 to 15-year-olds. And then I gather you got some smearing, called anti-vax. Are you anti-vax?
No, I mean, before this, I hadn't even thought about it. I and my kids had all their vaccinations, and I think actually one thing that I am worried about as a result of what's happened in terms of the process with JCVI and the government continuing, even despite what JCVI have said,
that the JCVI didn't recommend vaccines for this age group because of the risk of heart inflammation. That's right, isn't it?
Well, I think they were reluctant. They wouldn't recommend a mass rollout, and obviously we are in a position now where ministers are going ahead with that anyway. And my worry actually is that there are many parents, myself included, who had absolute faith before this moment in government process and JCVI. And I said that I literally had never even thought that there might be an issue with giving my child a vaccine, because of course you trust these experts. And I think actually one of the first things government must do after this is restore faith in the process here, because I think it would be tragic were vaccination rates for essential childhood vaccination programs to start to drop. And we're already seeing that. And to my mind, that is really, really worrying. There are vaccinations that these children really do need. And we must put out a message that actually, we can trust the decisions that are made by these experts.
Do you think then that the vaccination may be rolled out to even younger groups, given that they've sort of ignored the Joint Council on Vaccination and Immunisation, the JCVI? Do you think that they may do? I mean, I think Pfizer's now trialling younger groups of children. Is that a fear? What age group?
I mean, it doesn't look like there's been huge uptake yet for the 12 to 15-year-olds. I guess, what our campaign would say is, why is this needed? Because actually the vaccinations have been very successful in adults, which is great. And they have broken the link between infections and hospitalization. So kind of why would we go down the age groups? I think if they do, I think there will be a great many parents, myself included, my kids are 5 and 8 now, who will not feel that is an appropriate course of action.
Yeah.